Oui.
Je ne suis pas Julie Gaillet.
Oui.
Arratsaldeon, sail ofizialeko Quai d'Orsay filma ikusi dugu eta orain egingo dugu bere prentsaurrekoa.
Alors il faut...
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. Let's commence the press conference referring to the official film Quai d'Orsay. We have with us his director Bertrand Tavernier and the producer Frédéric Boudoulan. And they are awaiting to listen to your questions. So, okay. The first question, who wants to ask the first question? Here in the first row, please. And meanwhile, I'll take turns for the questions that will be asked. Hi, good morning. I wanted to ask you two questions. The first is that the character of the Minister of Foreign Affairs reminded me James Cagney's character of 123 by Billy Wilder. I don't know whether you remembered that character or whether there's any relationship there. And the second question is, I'm not too sure whether you know the type of politicians we have here in Spain, but I'd like to know what politicians do you think are worse, the Spanish politicians, if you know them, or the ones in France, or the ones that you portray in the film, or any other politician? Okay, two answers. Yes, of course, I know the film 123 by Billy Wilder and James Cagney. No, not at all. I hadn't at all thought of James Cagney, except perhaps as regards to the speed of the dialogues. And there's a size issue between Intense L'Ermite and Cagney, who was very short. There's a difference in culture as well, because... But I don't know whether you know James Cagney is much more American, right? Much more American in the way he talks and the way he approaches the world. And he's also a bit of he's much more down to earth, shall we say, than Thierry Lhermitte. But I do have in mind slightly, and it is true that, for example, I had thought of that film by Billy Wilder, Pour le rythme. And I've always thought on how to address the political issue and the rhythm at what I have addressed it. I did think about that, but without bearing in mind any politically correct a priori, perhaps I thought about the rhythm of that film. To answer your second question, it turns out a bit difficult to know the French, to know who the French politicians are. So therefore, I must say, and I'm very sorry, and that I must tell you, well, I ignore it. I can't answer. I don't know any Spanish politicians. I only know those that perhaps appear in the French press. Generally, we talk about the Prime Minister and the President. We talk about certain statements of the Minister for Culture that more or less are quite apparent. That are quite mediocre, to use another term. Statements that make it quite clear that they know nothing about culture, but the same thing happens in the European Commission. Unfortunately, I really can't answer you. I'm very sorry. However, to get to know and to know what the behavior of the French politicians, that's enough, and it's pretty difficult for me to do so in any case. Dominique de Villepin had already... There was also a parody of his in a film called The Conquest, La Conquiste. I don't know what... that he's turned into an object of being... He's being laughed at. I don't know what he has. In The Conquest, I don't think it was a parody there. All politicians, right-wing politicians, appeared in that film. He just simply formed part of that group of right-wing politicians because he was one of the... He was one of the opponents of Sarkozy, so it was quite normal that he would fit into that group and that he appeared in that film. My approach is completely different. In The Conquest, we didn't ever see Dominique de Villepin working, just saying a few statements against Sarkozy. In my case, it's different. And secondly, Dominique de Villepin is just the author or the person who pronounced the most beautiful speech ever pronounced in the United Nations. He is one of the most formidable moments of French politics. And that's the way you see it in the film. He's a man who positions himself, he takes positions which are very powerful, strong against the North American neoconservatism against Bush, and many men in his party weren't in agreement with him. They didn't think along the same lines. And there were lies and inventions as regards to all of this, and it's also, we're dealing with someone who, for a certain amount of years, he worked in order to achieve peace in Africa and avoiding civil war. So therefore, there's sufficient material and sufficiently solid enough in order to reflect an attitude of which one can laugh at. That's how we can laugh at his behavior, the way he expresses himself, of how he has created a horrible chaos in his ministry, but we never laugh at his actions, never. In the film will never say that his positions were stupid, not at all. Sometimes he may express them very emphatically, but even in those cases, when he does it that way, even there he expresses interesting ideas when he says Europe shouldn't only simply be something which operates according the calculations of users, and use symbols, for example. It should be based upon symbols. When he says something like that, I think it's very interesting. It's much more interesting than what Mr. Barroso is saying now. It seemed a magnificent film, and because of the great talent that Mr. Tavernier has, what your film has transmitted is how ignorance is something that is in the hands of politicians, and I'm not too sure, apart from politics, did you want to transmit that idea as well? Yep, ignorance represents an enormous dictatorships, and there are a lot of people very adapted to it. But in the film, perhaps I don't agree with one thing, and that's after all of these questions, I want to remind you that the film is also a comedy, okay? And I hope that the audience can laugh, have a good laugh with the film, and that they perceive, the audience perceives the irony and the humor which is inside it, because all of these questions are quite serious, excessively serious, and I'm under the impression that I made a film like it was like an article in a newspaper, but such isn't the case. But what I don't agree with you, and excuse me for saying so after being so kind with me, because I think the characters in my film aren't ignorant. For example, the head of the cabinet that Niels Aristeros-Strup, he's a person who's very wise, and he knows much more of what's happening throughout the world than all of us. I think that the person who takes care of the Middle East is more intelligent than the majority of political journalists as well. And he also tells them, and it's also said, for example, that journalists in Africa are stupid. They don't realize what's going on. No, what I want to demonstrate, or what it demonstrates, is that there are people who work under very difficult conditions, horrible and awful conditions, and that the majority of them, not all of them, but the majority of them are people who work very, very much. Our hero is a person who works all day long. I don't think in any of my films have I ever had an actor that works so much. Sometimes he works because the minister has fun, or makes him redo the same speech 25 different times. But the case is that he does work. And I believe that many characters in the film know a lot of things, but the idea is how to translate all of this For example, how to transmit this to the Council of Ministers. He explains that in the Council of Ministers, the only thing is important is what's important to the media, so therefore it's not worthwhile to talk to them about things that are important. The film also talks about all of this, about how slowly but surely, like part of the some of the politicians don't do their work very well, and as the French parliamentarians don't do their work very well, journalists that don't do their work, someone who does do a good job, and that's the idea of the film, have to simplify everything for them so that everyone can understand it better. So therefore it's a bit contrary to what you just mentioned. The minister himself knows what's going on. He's up to date to what's going on in all the situations. To pronounce the speech that he pronounces at the end, it was very important or necessary that he got to know that he had certain know-how and knowledge, because when he talks about the invention, I'm talking about an old country, an old continent, and that had a lot of power behind it, and that stems from from inside him. When I talked about ignorance, when I was talking about ignorance, I referred to the minister. When I was referring to the minister. Well, I don't know. The truth is, he's in another world. He's almost autistic more than ignorant. He doesn't realize that how everybody is working around him. He causes tornadoes when he walks in and out of doors. He can't see the effects of his acts. He's obsessed. He's a person who has an obsession that wants to achieve a goal at the end of the day, sometimes very emphatically, deliriously and comical, but he has an objective in mind and he wants to achieve it. But there's something he never changes an idea, is that Bush is going to do something absolutely a flagrant stupidity, and he never changes it. He always insists upon this. So therefore he was less ignorant or less cynical or a lesser murderer than Tony Blair. And I have more respect for him than that I have for Tony Blair. There's another protagonist, it seems to me, and that's Heraclitus. Why? Well, the dialogues are fantastic. Heraclitus' dialogues are fantastic. He's able to say things that are very deep that very few people will be able to understand. All of this appears in the comic strip, and I wanted to keep it there. What we've done is to change some of the quotes. We've added some other quotes, but I love those quotes that Heraclitus gives us in the film. I think it's a film that contains more phrases and quotes by Heraclitus than all in the whole history of cinema. Rarely has Heraclitus been so present in a film. So therefore I think that's quite good, don't you believe? I think that pays tribute to him. And his Heraclitus quotes, perhaps are not quotes that are going to be liked too much in Germany because supposedly they don't know much about the Greek culture. I like this idea, the idea of including those phrases by Heraclitus and those quotes, and I like the idea that could resolve the crisis between the Spanish and French fishermen, that is to say, the anchovy crisis, that Heraclitus has the solution. I think that's quite funny. That makes me laugh. Hi, again. Unfortunately, I didn't read the original comic strip, but so therefore I'd like to know whether those tornadoes that the minister, every time he appears and all the sheets flying in the air, whether that also form part of the comic strip or not, or this is just a marvelous thing that you discovered when decided to shoot. Well, I didn't want to copy the comic strip. The comic, that movement can't be seen that you talk about. When he moves, he multiplies himself. I could have only have done that with the special effects, but I said, hey, I think it's much interesting to find an equivalence, something that is suggested in the comic strip, but this is not shown. For example, he moves his hands and his hands and arms so much, and the sheets fly all over the place. So therefore, I use that as a principle. Every time he entered through a door, he had to generate a tornado, as if it were a tornado or a whirlwind. And before he arrived, he was preceded by a tornado or a whirlwind. And plus, He never stopped to see the effects that he himself had caused when he walked in and out of doors. It's horrible for the secretaries because all their sheets fly all over the place. You see that they've got to reorganize their sheets again, and he doesn't even stop to look at them. And all of a sudden, we had to add a lot of other things, like, for example, the sound of the doors opening and closing. Slowly but surely, we started to have ideas, and we saw how the secretary has got to place something heavy on top of the sheets so that they don't fly. But he always comes in when you least expect it, and sheets fly. Robert Letine has said, I think this is a trait that defines the character, the fact that he doesn't care less about the effects of his own behavior or the way he walks. The idea was to try to find equivalences and to not copy the comic strip, but I think that we've ended up inventing certain elements which I believe to be interesting. The comic is formidable, but it isn't the same as the film. We've added, I don't know, perhaps 40 or 45% as regards to the number of scenes. So, for example, all of those scenes referring to those meetings that are held when they address all of the questions and that the parliamentarians have to ask the government, questions that the members of the ministerial cabinet write down. All of that didn't appear in the comic strip. For example, the fact that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs didn't have internet, that doesn't appear in the comic strip either. And the preparing and the writing of the final speech in the United Nations, what didn't appear in the comic. I asked Antonin Bourdieu to add it in the last moment. The character of Arthur's companion or partner was completely different. She was a woman who was always complaining, who didn't work. She didn't have a job. On the contrary, I wanted this woman to be all the contrary, a woman who's fun, sexy. I wanted her to be exactly just like Arthur and who could laugh at him on occasions, and so that we could establish a distance from him. And I also wanted her to have a job, which would allow us all to film another different France, let's say. That schoolyard scene where she works in a very difficult suburb where she works with students who belong to different ethnic groups. So therefore we see another France there, the popular France, the people's France, shall we say. And I also want there to be a true love story between both of them, and I believe that the alchemy between Raphael and Anaïs, I think they make up a beautiful couple, and it's a unbelievable couple from the second scene. It's very difficult in cinema to impose a couple before the film has already started. It's easy to find a meeting or how people fall in love, but in this case, there was alchemy, there was chemistry, there was enormous chemistry that immediately in the 15 first seconds you see that they're a real couple. You see they live together, they know how to laugh at each other, how to laugh at each other and make jokes at each other and so on. And that was very essential for me, and that's what I wanted to add to the comic strip with the agreement of the authors, because we wrote the script together, but I did take away different graphics aspects to Star Wars, for example, which I thought was too explicative in a film. When the minister is thinking about Darth Vader, I think I preferred to have the face of Raphael, his character, and I want the audience to imagine what he's thinking of about it instead of imposing a vision which I believe to be too forced. I see that to make the film you've required the help of the Quai d'Orsay. Yes, we shot in the Quai d'Orsay as well. And it appears in the credits at the back, at the end. Nuances. Did you know the Quai d'Orsay what they expected with this film beforehand? And on the other hand, the relationship between the world of culture and French politics, or this French government in the world of cinema. What's the situation? Could you talk a bit about that? I'm going to answer. You answer the first, and I'll answer the second. Yes, of course. There was a long negotiation with the Quai d'Orsay. According to the circumstances, they were going through refurbishing at the Quai d'Orsay when we were shooting. So therefore, And there were canvases and scaffolding all over the place, and therefore we were obliged to shoot when they stopped working, that is, as of 5 p.m. in the afternoon and on the weekends, which wasn't easy, and I can tell you this as a producer. And of course, as I didn't have to pay for Heraclitus, I could compensate one thing for another. Obviously, the comic stream is very popular amongst French diplomacy, it's always easier to laugh at people of the past, because we're always under the impression that it's much easier. And there's another phenomenon, that is to say, the French cultural policy and the crisis means that they want to make their heritage much more profitable. They've created an agency which is in charge of negotiating the shooting of films in public buildings, and they are in charge, therefore, of making an extra bit of money. And so, therefore, Quai d'Orsay, I'm sure that we've contributed a little bit to the works that we're carrying out for the refurbishing. They asked for a lot of money under these circumstances, and we had to negotiate a lot. But I think it's a policy which is a good idea to improve and refurbish their heritage. So I don't think we should censure it, because otherwise we wouldn't have been able to shoot pornographic scenes in the ministry. But what we've done, we've been able to shoot. As regards to the second part of your question, for some time now, everyone on both parties, on both sides of the political spectrum, are in agreement. There's an agreement between the people in culture and politicians. On both parties, that is to say, both sides. So halfway through the 1990s, all of a sudden an agreement was achieved when the GATT was signed, and when the people realized that culture is important. It's important for a country, but it's also because culture generates jobs. Cinema creates so much jobs, as many jobs as the automobile sector, and I say it straight up front, without even talking about figures. And there's also something which is a bit of a paradox, and that is to say that the relationships have been better between the world of the cinema for a certain period of time and the political world when Nicolas Sarkozy was in power, better than with François Hollande, because some of his ministers, perhaps because they're ignorant or because they're demagogical, are in favor of piracy, that is, of all type of repression of pirate copying of films, and something that for the producers was a scandal. And at the beginning, it's true that our first meetings with François Hollande were a catastrophe. He knew nothing. They knew nothing. And Quai d'Orsay knew nothing about cinema. They didn't understand neither their mechanisms and they didn't understand what cinema is about. And I always say this, they are unable to see the cost of the absence of culture, which is perhaps the most important thing. And therefore, it was something of a bit of a premonition. We would have to talk about Victor Hugo when he says, we pay. We pay to enlighten the public squares. We pay for there to be lampposts and lighting in the... And we should pay to enlighten minds and spirits. Libraries and schools are much more valuable than prisons and jails, and we should develop more libraries, much more. It's the only way to fight and struggle against dictatorships, to struggle against the most dangerous beliefs. We have to do all of this through education and through culture. And this is true, that we have a relationship which has been improved slowly but surely. With the Ministry of Finance, we do have a complicated relationship. They always have a vision which is very restrictive, which is a very technocratic vision vis-a-vis culture. They always say yes. Okay, that's how much it costs. They say yes, but if we provide grants so that films, or subsidies so that people can continue to shoot films in France, yes, perhaps public money, but a film which is shot in France, The Princess of Montpensier, is 1.2 million euros that have been invested in one region. 1.2 million euros where they're going to create 90 jobs at a given moment. So therefore, The technocrat doesn't see this in his ministry. They don't realize this. So they dictate rules, and recently there's been a whole series of laws which are completely stupid, that are simply just laws where they want to save money, but they don't realize that at the end of the day it's going to be all the contrary. They're not going to save any money at all. In cinema, they have gotten rid of any for those people, for example, who work and at home assistance, there was a subsidy that was suppressed or was taken away. Now, what's happened now? They've increased people playing. What they've gained in taxes means nothing, because these people who work at people's homes as maids or whatever, now they are doing so in black. So therefore, or under the counter. So therefore, we've got to fight against those people in cinema. We've got to fight against those people that have that type of approach, people that are completely stupid in many cases. I want to congratulate you. I was in heaven watching your film, especially when I saw the audience and I heard the audience laughing. It's difficult to make a comedy just like you've made, and at the same time to evoke problems, but by means of comedy, the comedy of the politicians. But I have a question. Could you explain how you chose the cast, the actors, and also that rhythm to offer us this comedy? I think it works. Yes, I think it works when you see, and it works very well in the film theatre. Choosing the actors, well, I had certain principles, essential principles in mind. There shouldn't be any feeling of condescendence, and that is to say, there shouldn't be any superiority on behalf of the authors as regards to those people that are reflected, that we're laughing at. That was very important. As well as this, the rhythm and the pace was also very important. But it shouldn't feel precipitated, as if we should advance quickly, but in turn, at the same time, it couldn't seem something which was artificially accelerated. For a director, these types of challenges that have to resolve are very important. And that's what I've tried to do on the day-to-day. I tried to resolve it, and acting and working with the actors. When I chose the actors, some of them arrived immediately. Niels Arestrup from the beginning was there, and I thought about him. Thierry Lhermitte also, and he forms part of those actors that when you start to work with them, after 5 seconds you go, well, why did I even doubt 10 seconds having use him? And he couldn't have done a better job than and nobody could have done a better job than what he did in his character, portraying his character. Another thing that I asked implicitly is that nobody should perform comically. And that's something that some of my former accomplices, like Jean Rochefort, a great actor, when he saw the film, he thought it's magnificent, it's formidable. Finally, a comedy, and where the actors aren't comical, where they portray their role seriously. So therefore, I always got on set and I said, what if I did a dramatic film with all of this subject matter? I would change the dialogues. But the scenes, I wouldn't change the scenes, because they would continue to work in the same manner, even if they were portrayed in a drama. But constantly I was thinking, a good comedy is a film that can be shot also in a dramatic tone, and it would continue to be just as logical in its being a drama or a comedy. And as of this phrase or this premise, I needed to respond to that challenge. The problem in a film is that it's not only to have ambition, but we've got to be able to maintain those ambitions and respond to them constantly, independent of the fact of all the imponderables that may come along. And here I had a crew that helped me enormously to respond to those challenges, because the editing of the film and also the production, and I want to thank to all of them, these people, all of them have contributed to allow us to shoot this film under a sort of feeling of joy. We didn't have to get on our knees to ask money to the bankers, and we didn't have to beg anything. We were able to do things in a relaxed manner, and I was able to dedicate all of my energy to work with the actors. I've been able to dedicate my energy to create that rhythm or that pace in the film, and also to provide the right tone, just the right tone for the film. Yes, please.
Sí, muy buenas.
Oh, hi, good afternoon. I liked it very much, your film, and I was impressed or surprised by how quickly politicians change their opinion. And I want to know whether do you think this happens in every country, or, and here in Spain, who do you think who could be the person that could change your opinion quicker than others? Well, I know who Santiago Carrillo was, and your former president Zapatero, but there are some politicians. Adolf Hitler, for example, didn't change his opinion, now did he? I think he was quite. The fact that he didn't change opinion, I don't believe that made him a much more humane person for not because he didn't change his opinion. It is true. Henri Janson said the following, who prepared dialogues, for example. He said, it's quite curious. Everyone who betrays claim the right to change their opinion, and that's not completely true. There are politicians that when they change their opinion, what they call that, what do they call that? They call that evolution. They talk about evolution. They're evolving, but under certain circumstances, a situation or discovering a certain situation can make people change their mind. There have been people that in 1938, well, Francois Mitterrand, for example, they went from a respect or supporting the extreme right wing and fascism, and then during the war, yes, that's right, albeit at about 1943, 1944, they discovered the resistance, the French resistance. They went on to the resistance, so therefore there have been changes which are very laudable. There we have a Minister of Culture who at the beginning was in favor of downloading audiovisuals in an illegal manner. And why has he changed his mind? Because he's discovered reality, the reality of the world of cinematographic cinema production, and he's realized the financial harm that piracy brings on. We shouldn't laugh at the people that change their mind. Perhaps there could be a good reason to change your mind. And there are some politicians who simply are opportunistic. There are some French politicians have changed their jackets time. They've gone from the far left through the center and then to the right wing, going through. For this, you need to have an extraordinary talent to be able to do that, don't you think? So I imagine in Spain, it probably is quite similar, but I don't know. Any further questions? No? Thank you very much.
Eh bien, le retour à la comédie.